And to get to see our characters actually within that context, not the way I would make it, but the way that movie is actually going to get made going forward, felt like really seeing the evolution of where this could go. And then, yeah, it's so fun to kind of see little hints of how all the stories are going to interconnect, and that's something that people have been, asking for, is for these post-credit scenes to mean something, and in the way they always used to, and it just felt really fun to kind of bring all of that together.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. BD here for Thunderbolts Director Debrief. Jake, Thunderbolts was awesome. We've talked about it in spoiler-free manners. Now we're going to dive into it.
All right, let's get into it.
We've all seen the movie.
Yeah. Okay.
Let's start at the beginning. I find it brave that you take a pretty well-known Marvel character out of the gate and say goodbye. How does that feel? How does that happen? Do you get a little nervous in those moments, or is it just like, hey, we're setting the stage?
No, I think, look, it doesn't feel good in the sense that I think Olga's a wonderful actress, and I know that I've gotten messages from people who are very upset when they have found that it's leaked. I understand all that. I think that one thing that's nice about working at Marvel and working with Kevin and Lou is that they're not afraid, and they don't feel, sort of like they're not afraid to take a leap and do things if they think it's right for the movie. And something we felt coming out of the strike, because we were about to shoot. We were 2 weeks away from starting shooting, and the strike happened, and we got shut down, and didn't get back to Atlanta for a year after that, and spent time back in Los Angeles after the strike was over, redeveloping the story. And it's just something I think, it's a rare position to be in, to have been that close to making something and then getting to take a step back, and really think about what you're making. And one thing that we felt like was we had wanted to bring the sense of tension to the movie and unpredictability, but the movie just felt a little bloodless. It just felt like, in a movie like this, like, sure, it's not going to be R-rated, but if you're not taking anyone off the board, if you're not introducing that sense, then are you really giving it the tension that it needs to function? And so, yeah, it's a sacrifice, and a sad one. I think that, I didn't take any pleasure and it's not you know what I mean? Like, but there's not, whatever people think of it, like, I think, and we wanted it to resonate in the rest of the story, but we also had a lot of conversations just about when to do it. And sure, like, obviously it's very quick. I think, we discussed doing it later, but it felt like that would then hang over the kind of sadness of that moment would then hang over too much of the rest of the movie and distract you from what we really needed to be building, which was, we have such limited real estate to build a strong bond between Bob and Yelena, and the whole movie is going to hinge upon that bond. It doesn't work without it. And so, considering all the things and wanting to have that tone and to keep some humor in it, it was better to play it early and dry. And look, had Ghost not done that, Taskmaster would have done that to Walker. You know what I mean? That they're all in this place where that's what they do. That's their job. These are contract kills. And so, in a way, it's very sad. And on another level, we're kind of getting a viewpoint into, like, the place that all these characters have found themselves. And as Yelena says later, which I think hopefully in its own small way, like, shows that we do care about what happened. Ghost asks her about it, and she says, yeah, she had a tough life. She killed a lot of people, and then she got killed just like us someday. And so, I wouldn't say that it's capricious, and I wouldn't say that it's just, tossing anything out. I would say that as sad as it is to do that, it is also using a death to try to inform the rest of our theme and what happens with the rest of our characters. And, Olga was a real sport to show up and shoot that with us, because it's not easy to do that in that circumstance.
I mean, I thought it worked. I thought it really set the stage for the movie.
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of what happens sometimes. Sure. When the movie was announced, it didn't have the asterisk in the title. And then, further along, we started seeing the logo evolution.
Yeah.
Was it always the plan to have this ending where it became the new Avengers name?
So from the moment I pitched on the movie, that was the ending. And the script was a very different script than what we ended up making. But from the very first draft that I read, that was in and that stayed in. And that was like
really?
The one thing that we had to do was they were going to get introduced as that by Val. And so I think it was part of my last pitch meeting. And I said, I think it'd be fun, to maybe do one ad somewhere where we put an asterisk on the title and we say, until we come up with something better. Yeah. And they thought, again, to their credit, like, Kevin and Lou loved it and they went with it, and marketing embraced it. I didn't know. I remember showing up to the kind of photo shoot day, which happens during your shoot. At some point, they show up on the weekend and all your actors go and do all the kind of photos for posters and all these early concepts. And I went and I was like, oh, you guys are really, using this asterisk thing, huh? Geez, yeah, I hope this works, And then deeper in this idea that, like, the name of the movie could actually shift on opening day. And, like, I think only a studio like this, in the position that it's in, could pull something like that off. And, I mean, we're sitting here before it comes out, so we'll find out exactly how it went, like, how I look. I mean, I gotta claim it either way. But I think it just felt like, from the moment it came out, I mean, this cast is A-list, but sure, people say, like, oh, these are the B-list characters, or what is this? Thunderbolts doesn't have the name recognition of a Superman or a Fantastic Four. And how could you use that as an opportunity? Like, what could you do with that and have fun with the sort of idea and the twist of it? And even in a way, like, I think, when people say, this isn't not my Thunderbolts, because it's not that first run where it's Masters of Evil. Well, I don't know how you would really do that in a movie context. I mean, maybe you could. It seems hard to me. But I do feel like in an odd way, like, our ending essentially honors that idea, which is like they end up in that position. And now maybe they're not the Masters of Evil, but they are people that really probably don't belong in this tower. Maybe could earn that right, but it's going to be an uncomfortable fit with them at the face of what they become in front of.
The internet would have something to say no matter what group of characters.
That is also true, and I should stop looking at it.
Did you? The Val reveal kind of reminded me of the Norman Osborn, like, Dark Avengers comics moment. Did you have that in mind at all?
I think we had a lot of references. I think, like,
course.
Eric and Brian had that built since I came in, and I think Kevin always loves, like, having a kind of, like, throwing a twist at the end.
Yeah. So. No, it was a really fun way to end it. As somebody who has gone through my own issues of, like, just self-worth and depression, and just really tough stuff, there's a moment in this movie that really resonated with me when you have this visual representation of family and friends saving somebody, essentially saving somebody's life, saving them from entering the void that's taking over them. Can you talk about developing that visual moment? Like, that is the heart of the movie, in my opinion, and it hit me in every way I think you wanted it to. I just love to hear about how you landed on that.
Yeah, it was a tricky thing. I mean, we knew we had this character that could not be beaten in a normal context, and was always going to be some sort of parable for mental health. And then it was sort of about, well, you don't want to watch them just talk him down. I mean, that's not going to be very exciting. And so Brian had this idea of, like, what if they go into the void, which is a really great idea. And then it was like, well, what does that mean? And at first it was sort of this, maybe just like a kind of under the skin, like, black empty space. And then I've always, for some reason, been obsessed with rooms and cycles, and I think that I had worked with Gondry on this TV show Kidding, and, like, loved doing practical stuff, and I know Lance Accord is a good friend of mine who shot being John Malkovich, and, like, grabbed that sequence and showed it as a reference to Kevin. And this thought of, like, finding an external way to dramatize this idea of thought loops and shame and an inability to get out. And it was like, oh, we can face him within here, and then you can even, once you're in the surrealist realm, you can really dramatize that sort of, Bob versus himself idea. But then once we were in there, I mean, it took a lot of work. And I think Joanna, when she came in, really spoke up for it. We had kind of gone away from it, but this idea of wanting to find the void as a big bad at the end of that journey and really seeing that confrontation play out. But then even within that, like, okay, so we've established this language that, like, the world itself can attack you, so they can be locked up. Mm-hmm. And I think in our initial versions, we had that idea of destroying yourself and needing to, we didn't want it to be like a literal hug as much as, like, pulling a very strong person back. Right. And in doing so, like, use this kind of simple transition and the fallback to bring you out of the void. And that would play sort of as, like, on one level externally, like, just needing to hold him back, and on a deeper level, sure, it's a hug. It's our Inside Out 2 ending. I think that what we missed at first and got added was that within that, just to, again, it's smaller, was that this expansion of the room and sort of separating them from Bob, and this idea of distance and becoming more isolated and more inward. And really this idea that goes back and forth from the beginning of the movie where Yelena says, we're all alone, all of us. And he says, it's what you said, we're all alone. And then her getting to him and saying, I'm here, you're not alone. And it's simple. You know what I mean? It's like you could play any way, but, like, when you have Florence saying it, it works because it's Florence. And giving her kind of an action, because so much of it is Bob, who is not your protagonist, but who you do really care about, but giving your protagonist, like, an active role within that sequence and a sort of action run to get through and get there to him, and then eventually all of them to get to him that finally made it work.
Yeah, I mean, it was beautiful. And I love that.
Thanks.
Was my favorite
Thanks
part of
so
the movie,
much.
to be honest with
Cool.
you. Of course, we have an awesome credit scene, which I learned today was directed by Matt Shackman. Or somebody
The post-credits?
Yeah, was that true?
Not
somebody
Matt.
in
I
the
love
hallway
Matt.
was saying they interviewed somebody who said that. So, okay, did you direct the credit scene?
I did not direct the second post-credits.
The second
I was
credits.
there. Yeah.
Okay, so you were there. I would just love to hear about what, because I noticed it was visually a bit different.
Maybe someone got the wrong idea. What I teased was that comes from the set of another movie that is in production.
Oh,
but,
okay. Well, somebody in the hallway who talked to you took it and relayed that to me, and hopefully they clear it up by the time they publish it, and I think they will. But
I mean, there's only really one other production left, so, you know.
Yes, that's
Yes,
true. But
yeah.
okay, so I would love to hear about, just because that obviously sets us up for we mentioned a space crisis. We have the Fantastic Four coming in. We have a new look on the characters you just put through the Thunderbolts New Avengers movie. Just what can you say about what we should interpret from that? What can we take away? The visual style. What's going on? Where's it going?
I think it's fun to see. I think like what we found in making the movie was where we maybe initially expected there'd be sort of cheers for them being introduced as the new Avengers. Like people needed a minute to process it, and so a lot of work in post and stuff that we picked up went into like designing a credit sequence that acknowledges that feeling of uncertainty with all these news articles being like, no way. But then eventually like, oh, maybe this could work. And then the kind of cereal aisle thing, which was fun, and that's the comedy side of it that we did. But then I think like it felt like you wanted the purchase of, let's actually see them in this context, and like it's so nice to kind of, like the way the Russos make movies is such a part, like of the DNA of this company and what those movies are going to be, and to get to see our characters actually within that context, not the way I would make it, but the way that movie is actually going to get made going forward, felt like really seeing the evolution of where this could go. And then, it's so fun to kind of see little hints of how all the stories are going to interconnect, and that's something that people have been, asking for, is for these post-credit scenes to mean something, and in the way they always used to, and it just felt really fun to kind of bring all of that together. So I got to go. I was there when they filmed it, and it was really just fun to watch these characters you worked with.
Yeah, you guys.
But like in this giant set in London, and
Yeah, well, I loved the movie top to bottom, and what you did was awesome, and I really appreciate you talking with me about it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, man.
Yeah.